all. This is Dr. Mobeen Sayed from drbeen.com. Welcome to one more show. So, with us today, once more, we have Paul Bork, our resident COVID stats master. So, Paul, take it away. Happy to have you with us.
Thank you very much, Mobeen. Uh, there's the cursor. There's this. Okay. So I'll start off here with a summary and try to pick some stuff up. First, the All Quiet on the Eastern Front, which is a reference to All Quiet on the Western Front, which was a World War I novel. And then we'll go on to the COVID pandemic is not over. We're past the beginning of the end, but we're not yet at the end of the end, is what hopefully the data will allow you to also conclude. Want to evaluate how good our predictions were. If you remember a while ago, based on predictions and the curve from the UK, made predictions about how the COVID cases would continue to decrease. And we'll take a look now that we've got 6 months or so since those predictions and see how good that extrapolation has been. And then at the end, we'll have something completely different. And that's a reference to a 1971 comedy based on the Monty Python's Flying Circus that I enjoyed. Overall, to put the whole thing into context, here are the daily new cases. This is from Worldometer. Here is the daily deaths, and you can see that it's not exactly correlated at the beginning, but the ending, they're both coming way down. Here is the very end of the COVID case information. It blew it way up, and you can see that it's still coming down. There's some uppage and down, but it's still coming down and looks like it might be turning up just a little bit. And here's a statement that you can look through that basically as of April 13th, they're no longer updating because they can't get updates from people and the interest or concern is over. And so I don't think the pandemic is over, but we're continuing to lose different sources of information, and they had become less robust and less valuable as we went going forward. And there's a couple others that I'll reference today, but I wanted to provide you all with one place to sort of get a feel as to how things are based on the way that we had looked at them before. And this is the same thing for our world in data, showing the various countries that we had tracked before. And here they are listed. And this is the last date was May 26th. And they don't have anything beyond that. If we take a look for the, we come down one more slide. And take a look. This is that graph. I moved the date, the starting date way up here so that it expanded the scale. And you can see that essentially 2 countries stopped reporting April 1st. And out of all the countries we were tracking, there's only 2 of them that are continuing to track and report anything. So our world in data isn't getting any information at all that will be helpful. Haven't for a while. This is their view of the sequences for the variant classes, what they call variant, but since there's variations inside the variants, I'm calling them variant classes, and they showed back when we had a high worldwide prevalence, and even at this that I got, the last data they have, we only have 3 countries reporting: United States, United Kingdom, and Canada. All the European countries had bowed out, and my bet is these 3 countries have stopped doing that as well. So now I'll switch over and take a look at the CDC. And here I have the reference, how to get to the same place I am. It's the US CDC. If you go on and just try to click there, I find it very difficult to find where it is, almost like it was being hidden, but it may just be that my skills are less than they used to be, but since I've preserved it in prior presentations, it becomes easy to click directly to it, and that still works. A number of places, such as in the UK, the URL or the web page that had data before is now 404, or it doesn't exist, and error, and you can't get anything. So I took the normal 4-line across the top and broke it in 2 to make them larger. For this slide, the trend in test positivity, and what that would mean is of the tests given, what percentage are positive, and it's flat. They're saying it's a 0.4% increase, but anything less than a 1% increase or decrease is really no change. COVID deaths, again, they're saying no change. Hospital trend in hospitalization rate, again, no change. But we have the trend in percentage of emergency visits that are COVID. And I believe these are people that have the COVID test. So a lot of hospitals test everyone that comes in because they adopted a program before. Their administrators bought tests, and if they don't use them, they'll expire, and then it'll look like their administrator wasn't doing their job at managing it, or for whatever reason, the reported hospital visits, I don't think these are people that are coming in because of COVID. I think they're people that come in that have COVID. But we're seeing a 16% spike in the last week. So across the US, there was a spike. And if you saw right at the end of the last data that we had in the Worldometer, it would look like it might be heading up. I think that data was probably a little older, but the data is going up and down, and lately it's going up. I would think that the emergency department visits would go up first, then the hospitalization would go up, and then we would see deaths go up if in fact it follows all the way through. But the emergency department visits should be the first thing going up. And the test positivity, my bet is that's being reported county by county, and it probably takes a while from when the emergency department does the test and then turns it in. So I would think that the emergency visits would even lead the test positivity. That's my guess. I haven't really checked to look at it, but as I remember back before when we saw it, the emergency department visits was the leading indicator that we had when there were spikes up and spikes down. And we're getting a 20% spike up basically to one significant digit. And I don't believe here we were getting it reported 16.2. I don't think they're differentiating. I don't think their data will show a difference between 16.2, 16.4, and I don't think it'll show a difference between 20 and 10 and 30. That's where I think it actually is. But they've calculated this number, and it's probably calculated correctly. But given the collection of data and the whatever other variables are there, my bet is this is one significant digit, which makes it 20%. Now we have the COVID variants, and the one that was dominating before is now decreasing. These are just these 2 weeks here, and the half week that we're through. We're almost the end of the week. So we basically have 3 2-week periods, so it's over a month late. These are just projections, and we've measured them historically, and then we measured them again recently, and the accuracy was not very good. So again, unlike the Zoe app that I think refined their estimates and just doing curve fitting and adding factors to try to get the early data to correlate with the existing data that the UK was collecting, that they were able to make their predictions fairly accurate. I don't believe I haven't seen anything that said that the CDC did it. And since the accuracy isn't improving, my bet is they didn't do curve fitting when they first came up with the protocol to do their nowcast or project forward 4 weeks or 5 weeks. And then since it takes a while for the data to be collected, that's why they called it a nowcast. It's a forecast, but it was a forecast based on old data, and so it's representing today. And again, they've got a gray box and a label saying this isn't real data, and it isn't. And so this tremendous growth we're seeing here in this one, this variant class here, is all projection. And the only thing they have are this little increase here. And again, the increase is supposed to grow. And these are the things that they tend to be wrong on, is they're doing the best they can, but I think they're doing straight line projections. And so whatever change occurred in the last 3 data points, they assume just continues. And so I believe it's probably a good in terms of math projection, but it probably isn't very sophisticated. Here are all the variant classes that they have, and you can see they include numbers that are ridiculously low, but they have a whole bunch of them trying to, I think, show people that it's complicated and you don't need to look at the data and just rely on us. But bottom line, just like the last couple times, since this is ranked in terms of percentages, here are the top 3 hitters, and usually there's 3 or 4, and we have the top 3. They'll show up later on. You don't have to remember them, but there's 3 of them. If you want to remember them, you can. We now have some more internal information. These are the regions that they projected. Absolutely no region in the country. And this is their statement about this, because I was looking at the nowcast. They require 300 sequences in the 2 weeks before. So I think that's the same thing that they've been using all along. If you remember, there were certain regions that dropped out and weren't procasted, and other ones that were. And I think we're still seeing numbers for the whole country because they're getting their 300 sequences. And so someone probably did an appropriate statistical analysis that said less than 300 isn't good and more than 300 is good. And they're using it as a protocol, regardless of whether it's accurate or not. This happens almost all the time. It's across the board. For example, in medicine, if you have a P greater than 0.05, it's absolutely proven. And if it's a little below, it's completely random. And that's not exactly statistically right, but it's a protocol that's consistent and it allows things to go forward. And I think it's good that they're being consistent in how they're projecting things.
Understood.
Do we have any questions or concerns with anyone?
There is one question. Ray Mitchell says, are the emergency department visits due to COVID symptoms, or is the positive test incidental to reason for the visit?
Great question. I did not spend the time this week to go back and refresh my memory on exactly why. My memory is it's people who showed up from the emergency room that tested positive, that some emergency rooms may not report it unless the person came in, but we're talking about policies across all the counties, and the county medical officer is in charge of the process and what they collect. I mean, Texas is a big state, but there's over 250 counties in Texas alone. So trying to figure out what's being done in Texas, let alone in all the U.S., is going to be very difficult or impossible. And there may be some states that have a very consistent program and have a state-driven process. I remember early on, some of the press was asking the medical officer for the state if he could go and push some policy on the counties. And he said, basically, wait, you don't understand. These are elected officials that report to the county electors. I'm happy if they return the phone call when I leave it. You know, I'm in no position to tell them or dictate how they practice medicine. And I think whether or not that's literally true, that's factually true, because CDC will not be able to go to however many counties in Alaska or Florida or even California and say, you have to do it this way. And if they did, most of the medical officers would set it aside and probably go out of their way to do it another way. So I believe that is just positive of people showing up, but I don't know that.
Understood.
Very good question.
Thank you. Thank you.
Remember the 3. Here are the 3. They're all together. It's all from the same variant direction. These are, nobody knows what happens when we do the sequencing. The guys who do the sequence and look at it and try to guess what the relationship and where they came from, and they stick them together in a tree because they like organization and it's useful. Because the side effects, if you remember back, if we go back to the original, some of these diseases were affecting in the lower lungs and causing more trouble in different treatments. And now we're essentially all these variants going back that have been dominant, and they have all the different numbers here, and we have all the numbers of variants and variant classes here, but they're insignificant in terms of the percentage of the population that has it. And so these are all the same, and they're going to keep branching off and go forward and be at least a little different because they have to reinfect people. Otherwise, if they weren't able to go back and reinfect people that have been infected with the parent, then the disease would just die off. So they have to make some change to go forward to pick folks up, because there is some immunity. It does seem to wane, but there's still some training that occurs. And if someone was infected with the same thing that they had before, there is resistance to that. And so I wanted to talk about that a little bit. We have before, but that would mean that if someone has stored a vial of this variant here that was causing lower lung infection and huge death rates, let's say, that may not be the right one, but just pick an old one, and we brought it up to today's immune system in dealing with these is probably such that this variant would have zero chance of going forward and would not come back as a new infection, because if you remember, the epidemiologist said so many times that most of us got tired. It's a novel infection. Well, this is no longer a novel infection. And so they've lost that huge advantage they had in the beginning, that they had, that the body's immune system and the medical system hadn't dealt with something almost the same. It had been so much different. And so again, I think we're seeing these three. It will continue. And if in some corner of the earth, one of these things that was real troublesome comes back up, I just think it's not going to be able to do anything at all.
So a couple of questions. One is, Faraz says, how about Mexico? I think Faraz had said before as well that it is getting bigger in Mexico. Do you have any data? I have it open and I see some uptick.
I have not seen Mexico. A part of the problem that's going to occur in a country like Mexico is they have a whole bunch of folks coming through the country, and you could have a variant that develops someplace else, that one of these that has come through, and you may have seen the XBB 1.5, but this one that comes down here, this 1.5.72 might be enough different to have it go in.
I don't see much change for us in last 90 days. So if you see here, this is like, yes, it's kind of similar. Okay, sorry for
and I don't know how much, before I would rely on it, I'd want to go back and see if Mexico is still being robust and how they're looking for and accounting for cases, or is this simply one clinic in Mexico City and no one else is reporting, for example, in which case the stability might not be accurate, but I don't know. I've not looked at any country other than the US, because I have enough trouble trying to continue with that, with the data that we have, and most of the other countries have stopped reporting.
One more question. Stephanie says, is the original deadly form still spreading?
No. Well, that's the medical official's answer is no, it's not. Could it be spreading in some little place and they haven't seen it or whatever? Of course it can. Is it still going to be deadly? No. I think for the vast majority of the people that have had it, or had a vaccine, or had a vaccine and then had it, or like me, had 2 vaccines and had it 4 or 5 times, the original disease will be less than a cold.
Understood. Thank you.
Here is the US CDC data on wastewater viral activity over time. Okay, if you remember before, they were trying variants and all kinds of stuff, and they've gone back and they're just looking at the activity level. And this is actually a percentage, certain number of colonies, viral particles that they find per milliliter. It doesn't matter what the scale is, whatever the scale is, just think of it as percentage. This could be 100% being the highest, and it's going up and down. So it's just important as to the overall relative. And again, this is as low as we've ever had it. Maybe there is as low, and here was really low, but my bet is that was because they didn't have a lot of people signed up. So we're essentially as low as we've ever had it, or tied for it, and now we're seeing a slight increase, and this looks like it's about the same 20% increase that they were talking about, the increase in the emergency room. Now they put here low level, and remember I complained before they had it marked high when it was low, and I think somebody just should turn their phone off, but I didn't. Anyway, someone should just missed the reclassification. So what I did here is I did a cutout. I have a nice little thing that allows me to cut and paste. So I cut off around the low and put it here so you can do the color matching. And so I think they're predicting right here where the blue arrow is that we're not at the minimal stage, but we're at the lowest of the low stage in terms of their view of the overall U.S. Activity in wastewater. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you.
Here again, we have the map that shows the little dots. And if you remember, the dots change over time. So one presentation to the next, we might have Salt Lake City that has been reporting consistently, but either they didn't report this time or they're undergoing a check of the accuracy and their data isn't in the table or whatever. So some of these pop on and off and on and off or whatever. And so their classification is white are new sites, so they're not going to color coordinate them as far as whether it's higher or lower than last time because it's a new site and they don't have any data. So that becomes white, essentially the color that is normally used for places that have no data, and they have no data on the change, so that's appropriate. And they go all the way up here for the increases, okay? All right. And we have the map, and you can look and see your favorite place or whatever. Now, I noticed right here, this is about Houston, Texas, and there's a whole bunch of white sites right there. And so I took a cut and blew it up, and there it is blown up. Something's being done in the city of Houston or around the city of Houston. I don't know whether there was suddenly federal money available or they found it or someone's finally found the phone to do it, or my bet is someone has turned in a sign up for the city of Houston, and it either didn't work and they kept filling out the electronic form and kept hitting it and they signed up any number of times, or 5 different people tried to sign up or something. But I don't believe this is true. I don't believe this is an accurate representation of what's happening in the real world. I think it's probably an accurate representation of what happened in their program. But I thought it was interesting that we have one site in the whole United States that seems to be signing up a whole bunch, and the rest, the new sites, seem to be fairly low. So I think this is what they call a data anomaly, and it just seems so it has to be something extraordinary going on in Houston, Texas, if this is real information. So again, I'm looking at it and trying to point out things that I see. And part of the reason to do it is to show you, and part of the reason is to sort of continue to be educational and show you the sort of things that at least I find that interesting, or from a data perspective that you can find just looking at it. It's like, okay, something silly or whatever happened in Houston, whatever it was. And so again, if this were really a real crisis, it was ongoing, the CDC, and we're very concerned about it, this might be, hey, send an investigator down to find out what happened in Houston. These days, I don't think anyone cares. We'll just see if next month, if all these people, or next week, if all these people report new numbers, or whether it becomes just one dot.
Understood.
Okay, so the summary that I have from this is it appears the world is approaching the end of COVID. And this is from a disease perspective, okay? I think COVID as an active disease continues. It's oscillating up and down, back and forth, just like it was before, but perhaps at a lower level. And we have to be compassionate. Even if it's almost over, people are still getting sick, and some people may be getting sick for the first time, and it's a different feel, at least for me, when I was sick with COVID than if I had a flu or a cold or anything else. There's still some people dying from it, and it's still just as horrible if you die from it at the beginning or the middle or the end, and I think we want to be compassionate about that. We're having new variant classes continue to come out. And if they didn't, we wouldn't have reinfection. So that means if you get it and you had it last week, if a new variant class comes out, you might be able to get it again. So there is no, the idea that some politicians have of if you get vaccinated or if you have it, you can't get it again. That just isn't true for COVID. It may be true for some diseases, but it isn't true for COVID before, and it isn't true for COVID right now. I haven't seen anything showing that there's any change indicated for treatment protocols to change. No one is saying, hey, we're getting a new symptom. Oh, what we were doing to treat people last week, last month isn't working. There's still probably refinement where people are saying we used to give, these pills, 40 hours apart, and now we're going to try 36 or we're going to try 48 or something like that. I'm sorry to see that, Denise. Political folks have COVID and they're done with COVID. The political people want to put it behind, and they're going out of their way across the world to dismiss it and say COVID is over. It isn't of concern. We're not going to spend any money. We're not going to talk about it. They're done. They've had COVID and it's over politically. It's not over medically. It may be over medically for a vast majority of people, but I do believe that the political people on any spectrum are tired of it. They want to move past it. They don't want it to continue to go on. And so, unfortunately, recognizing some of the people that are still harmed or are still sick becomes more politically dangerous or less likely to occur than before, sort of like at the beginning of the AIDS crisis, where the politics and the medicine people weren't in the same field in terms of how much they would recognize the disease. From everything I've seen, and the data isn't very good because the political folks aren't allowing it, or there isn't it there. And these experiments and these studies aren't hard to do if there wasn't political punishment. But long COVID and vaccine injury risks appear to be consistent, it seems to me. That every time you get it, you have the same chance of getting long COVID that you had before. The fact you had it 4 times doesn't reduce the odds. The fact you have it severely or lightly doesn't seem to affect the odds. And the same thing with the vaccine injuries. The limited data I saw, and some of it is months old, yes, but showing that the vaccine injury did not go down just because someone was getting their 4th or 5th or 3rd injection versus the 1st. There may have been some increase for the 2nd vaccine, but I don't know that there certainly was that information out there, but not sure that whether that was the political people or that was medical or what it was. And so, as I say here, the actual risks are uncertain, but I've seen no indication and nothing from the data and no studies that show that these risks are decreasing for each exposure, and nothing to show that they're increasing for each exposure. So so that's the end of the new data, and changing the focus a little bit. I made a prediction months ago. It's an old prediction. How wrong is it? Let's take a look. Remember this busy slide that we had before where we had the number of cases and the number of new cases? We got the rough clearage. That's how we calculated the rough clearage period, because it was at a peak, and so that the number of cases wasn't increasing or decreasing, and we could sort of take the ratio and eliminate some of the error that would occur if we didn't. And since I don't have the data and can't track individuals, this was the best I could do. And then we went over here to show the number of cases, and remember they made a systematic correction, and this peak dropped from way up here down here. And again, I think it was this refining that I'm talking about to try to make the predicted data that since they collected it faster, to fit the current curve, and they're interested in the front end, and they're not so concerned if year-old data gets messed up a little bit, but they do want it to be consistent through the whole curve so that they don't change it. So that's what I believed happened, but that's what this was for, okay? And then we had looking at the troughs and running a rough line just by getting the data out and running a line and getting an R squared. of about 90%. And we had this prediction, and looking at it, it said that we had about 1,200 days until it hit zero. That would be way, way out here. Then we had another line coming down from the peaks. And if you remember, it did not have, when I did this, it was still increasing. But so I moved out like a day or two and created a dot here to try to give me an extra point to do my line estimate. And this said we were 240 days from zero. And that the in between the upper and lower, the actual cases are bouncing up and down. And here was an anomaly that it didn't really come down. Something else was happening there, if you remember. And so the question is to take a look at where these projections are and what happened. And what I've done is I copied these lines over and kept their slope the same, okay? And that way, if I slide them forward and backwards, the slope is the same, and I'm just doing it graphically, okay? And this is labeled, this is an old slide, but this is the one where we made the projections. And so want to take a look. It's always good if you make a prediction to take a look and see, was I in the right state, in the right ballpark? And so reducing this, keeping the slopes the same, this is where the lines go. They meet right here. This is zero. And so the zero will be about there. And right now, where are we? We're right here. What I did was see the purple line? This goes back 6 months. I'm going from this point 6 months forward. So this is where we are today. The graph doesn't go out, but graphically I can take the same distance. And since the steps are the same, if I have a line that's as long as the purple line that was 6 months, and I put it right here, which is 6 months ago from today, then this is where we are today. I don't have to extend the graph. I don't have to measure things. I can just, it's really nice doing it in PowerPoint, because once I get this line that's parallel with the bottom, whether it's tipped up or not, I can copy and paste it, and I get other lines with the same slope. And so all these lines have the same slope as this one, which was set on the zero. And so moving this forward to 6 months, and looking at this downward slope, where does it hit for today? And that's with the black arrow showing that's where it hits. Put a circle around it to show this is the area of interest of what our prediction was. If we're looking at the troughs, the slope isn't nearly as much. It starts lower, but isn't as much. So it would suggest that we're way off the paper before we're supposed to be this low. So clearly these predictions are not consistent, because if it were, this would go up and down, up and down, up and down. And right here, they'd be the same. And so, again, I know it's wrong. And the question is, how wrong is it? Is it useful? And I think every projection and prediction and measurement is wrong. And some are wrong because the data collected is wrong or whatever. But we need to always start with the idea, this assumption, it's wrong. How wrong is it? Is it useful? And so here, I'm going to think, yeah, so let's see where we end up, okay? And this is prediction for, of course, the UK, not the US. Okay? And I took where this hit and put this line at the same height, okay? Then I took another line that was parallel and put it at the same height, then lined it up. And so I'm hitting the scale over here to see what kind of number we have, okay? And what I'm doing is not measuring, I'm just doing graphical statistics, if you will. And we go to the next one. I've blown it way up. You see, this is the letter that said old. And this was the line that was coming in, and this is the line for zero. And the zero was right in the middle of the O, and so it's on the top. So I put a new line, again, parallel, because it's keeping everything parallel, okay? And so what I'm doing is I say, here is, this is parallel. This red line is in the middle of the big blue line, so that's where we currently are. This line is at 1,000. This line is at 2,000. Okay, and where did I get that? This is going from 0 to 500, right? I found another graph that was going from 0 to 500. It actually was early on in the presentation I did, so I cut that out. Line the 0 up, line the 500 up. Then I have my 0 here, and then I have the middle of the line. And so this is where it is. And so this is 1,000, this is 2,000. So rather than just guessing from this graph, even blowing it up, I know I'm in between 1,000 and 2,000. Doing the same thing again, taking this section, these lines, okay, I have the bottom blue line, which is now fat because I blew it up, the red line, which is now fat because I blew it up, and the upper line that's now fat because I blew it up. I now have a scale that goes from 0 to 100. I put the blue line in the middle, and this is about 20. So I have 1,200 cases estimated. Then I do the same thing again, except this is going from 20 to 40 that I had. And so we double it. And so it says we've got 1,260 cases is the estimate. Way too many digits, but just showing you how this works. And so I'm going from 20 to 40 on the scale that I had before. And again, fat line and the 0, and put the little one. And so this is about 30, except this is going from 20 to 40. And so I have to double it because I'm going 20 units, not 10. So that's where I got the 1,260 estimated for the UK. And the reason this would be important, I mean, why do a deep dive on this, you might say? Yeah, it might be fun and interesting, but why do it? First, I'm illustrating statistical estimation. Most of the time we do it in numbers which aren't easy to see, but it's exactly the same kind of process. You go and you take a infinitely thin line and you take the distance and add them up, and you have a formula of minimizing the square of the distance, and on and on and on. And so it's the same kind of thing as what we're doing here. Also, I wanted to show you the difference between extrapolation, which is inherently less reliable than interpolation. And if I go back up, 1, 2, 1. If this is data curve here, trying to figure out the difference between this point and the point right next to it, this is interpolation in between the data that I have collected. What I'm doing out here, when I go forward, this is extrapolation, going beyond. I have no data out here. This, on some date right here, maybe the viruses all stop or something happens. We have no idea. There's no information. And so extrapolation is inherently more dangerous. And so again, it gives me a chance to sort of show and teach you guys a little something about that. Okay. And if this is correct, I'm not saying it is, but if it's correct, we now have an order of magnitude estimate as to what sensitivity if we're trying to measure the UK COVID cases today. If someone says, I've got a test that can test 5,000 or less, we could say, don't even bother. The cases should be about 1,000. If you say, I've got a test that can test 500 or 50, say, well, that might work. You might find a signal there. And so this is the reason that somebody might really do that. The other thing is to sort of see if what we predicted was correct. And if it isn't correct, has there been some systematic change? And for example, it could be a change in the variant class and how it infects people, if the number of infections is suddenly higher or lower. And if everything stays roughly the same, then the sort of rough extrapolation, not looking at anything about other than just the raw data and going forward, it gives you an idea that nothing significant changed because it ended up fairly close to what we projected. And I'm amazed at how good this turned out. I was sure I would be off by an order of magnitude, but this looked surprisingly good to me.
Interesting.
But as you see, if you have the cut and paste, if you have any graph that you're trying to measure and you get an image of it, you don't have to spend a lot of time measuring. You can just do the graphical thing and very quickly be able to measure from the graph, because my eyeball is not calibrated, but if I have a scale right next to it, I can read off the scale.
Mm-hmm.
And now for something completely different. This is the new things that are occupying CDC. We had a similar thing last time, but one of the things that CDC does is they're looking for new diseases coming in, and they monitor cruise ships a great deal because the people are very collected together and infectious diseases tend to run around and cause trouble. Okay, there was another infectious disease that caused people to, sick with nausea towards the end of a flight. Okay, they had 25 returning passengers on a plane that all felt sick at the end of a flight from Vancouver, British Columbia to Houston's George Bush's Intercontinental. So it's a long flight, and there are 25 people that all felt sick. And those 25 people were a third of the 75 people that came off the ship. This doesn't go to anywhere, but this is, they're very worried about 75 people. So politically, they're not interested in COVID anymore. They've moved on. This sort of monitoring was being done all along, but right now, this is the things that we hear from the CDC PR people and the news. And again, 75 out of 163. Yeah, let's check and see 163. How many of those felt nausea? And again, if you get a third of it, you're thinking, well, maybe we found an infectious disease here. But if it's mild nausea, no one's going to spend a lot of time looking at it. And here we had at the end, and hopefully you feel better. United Airlines said, oh my gosh, all these people got sick. We're going to do a deep cleaning before we use this aircraft again. Hopefully kill all the bacteria or viruses that may have been involved with that. Here's the site to the news story. But again, I think just trying to show you that while I'm suggesting there's no reason to be overly concerned about this, CDC and the activity they're doing is fairly consistent with that, saying they're worried about things that we didn't hear much about during the middle of the COVID, even though stuff like this was continuing. And that's what I have.
Thank you so much.
Sorry, just a conclusion slide. I added that right at the end. COVID's not over, still dangerous for some, and it's a little thing for all of us, and it's dangerous for some, and it's continuing to change. So the effect is slowly decreasing, and it's slowly decreasing, but it is slowly decreasing. So it will be around for probably several more months, or maybe my 1,200 days to the end will turn out to be right.
So with this, thank you very much, Paul. Thank you for enlightening us, collecting all this data. Thank you for teaching us stats on the way as well. And thank you for taking the turn today.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Cool Beans. I'll see you tomorrow and the next week. Bye for now.